Imagine you're standing in the middle of one of the largest buildings on Earth. Not a stadium or a skyscraper, but a single factory floor in Everett, Washington, where Boeing builds wide-body jets under one massive roof. The place is so big, it generates its own weather. Before modern climate control was installed, clouds used to form near the ceiling. And somewhere inside, tucked between half-assembled 787s and engineers clutching clipboards, is the most expensive question in commercial aviation. Should Boeing build a brand new airplane? Not an upgrade, not a stretch. A clean sheet, from scratch, bet the company on it aircraft. One that could cost over $20 billion to develop. One that, if it fails, doesn't just hurt Boeing, it reshapes the entire industry. Here's the kicker. Boeing is already carrying $53 billion in total debt. It lost $14.3 billion in 2024 alone. And as of today, CEO Kelly Ortberg has publicly said Boeing is not ready to launch anything new. So why is the entire aviation world watching Boeing's next move as if their lives depend on it? The answer is because, honestly, for some of them, their business does. To understand what's really at stake, you have to go back to 2004. That's the year that Boeing discontinued the 757. Passengers cried, airlines begged, but Boeing didn't budge. The 757 was a workhorse in the most literal sense. Roughly 200 passengers, a range of 3,400 to 3,900 nautical miles. It could fly transatlantic routes from secondary cities without asking for a second mortgage on fuel. It could do the New York to London run, the Boston to Reykjavik hop, the routes that weren't big enough for a 767, but were too long for a regular 737. Airlines loved it because it printed money on routes everyone else ignored. When Boeing retired it, the plan seemed sensible on paper. The 737 would stretch upwards, and the upcoming 787 would reach downward. The gap would close naturally, but it didn't. The physics were brutal and unforgiving. Stretching the 737 into a longer range machine meant fighting a 60-year-old airframe design. The plane's engines literally sit too low to the ground because the original 737 was designed in the 1960s for airports that barely existed in their current form. You can't make that aircraft meaningfully longer ranged without a fundamental rethink. You only have to look at the disastrous introduction of the 737 MAX to see how true this is. And the 787, while a marvel, is designed for 242 or more passengers on long-haul routes. Running it on a thin route meant for 200 people burns money faster than a startup in a recession. So airlines were left with a problem that had no good solution. They kept flying their aging 757 fleets years past what anyone had originally planned. Delta Airlines alone operates over 140 757s and 767s that need replacement within the next decade. United Airlines faces nearly the same situation. These are not theoretical projections. These are actual jets with actual maintenance bills and retirement dates approaching fast. And Boeing had nothing to sell them. On the 30th of October 2024, Iberia took delivery of the first Airbus A321 XLR. If you don't know what that means, here it is in plain English. Airbus took its existing A320 family, which is a narrow-body single-aisle aircraft, and engineered it to fly 4,700 nautical miles. That's transatlantic, on single-aisle economics. 2 weeks after delivery, Iberia flew it commercially from Madrid to Boston. Airlines had already placed over 500 orders before the first plane was even delivered. American Airlines, United Airlines, Aer Lingus, Iberia, all signed up. Because the A321 XLR doesn't fill the mid-market gap perfectly, but it exists, and in aviation, that matters more than perfection. Now here's where things get interesting, because the A321 XLR is not without its flaws. It carries 140 to 200 passengers in a single-aisle 6-abreast configuration. On a 2-hour hop, that's fine. On a 9-hour transatlantic crossing, that narrow cabin is a competitive liability. Business travellers expecting a proper twin-aisle experience with wide seats and a real aisle to walk around in are just not getting that on the XLR. Airlines trying to sell premium transatlantic seats on a single-aisle jet are doing it with one arm tied behind their back. That, right there, is the exact gap that Boeing's proposed 797 was designed to fill. Boeing engineers have been quietly obsessing over the 797 since around 2015. The official name is the NMA, New Midsize Airplane, but the aviation community gave it the 797 moniker because it logically follows Boeing's commercial numbering sequence after the 787. The concept is ambitious. a twin-aisle composite aircraft carrying 225 to 275 passengers depending on configuration, with a range of roughly 4,500 to 5,000 nautical miles. It would use composite construction technology similar to the 787, scaled down to mid-market economics. 2 aisles instead of one, which means a fundamentally better passenger experience than the Airbus A321XLR for longer flights. And crucially, it will be able to open what the industry calls long and thin routes, city pairs that have consistent enough daily demand to fly, but not enough passengers to justify sending a 787. Think Manchester to Denver, or Naples to Chicago. Secondary cities connecting directly, rather than routing everyone through hub airports. Boeing forecast demand for 4,000 to 5,000 of these aircraft over a 20-year period. ICF International estimated the market at 3,000 to 3,500 units. Even the most conservative analysts saw over 1,000 potential sales. The market was real, the demand was clear. But Boeing shelved the NMA in January 2020. Why? Because every time Boeing tried to look up, something pulled it back down. The 2018 and 2019 737 MAX crashes killed 346 people. The worldwide grounding that followed didn't just halt deliveries, it forced Boeing to redirect every available engineering resource towards crisis management. Development of new aircraft programs didn't just slow down, it stopped dead. Then came the 5th of January 2024. An Alaska Airlines 737 MAX 9 suffered a door plug blowout at 16,000 feet. Investigations revealed the aircraft had left Boeing's factory in Renton with missing bolts. The FAA immediately capped 737 production at 38 aircraft per month, which has since risen to 42. Boeing's cash flow, already hemorrhaging, tightened further. Then there was the machinist strike, September 2024. Roughly 33,000 workers walked out. The strike cost Boeing an estimated $1 billion per month. When it finally ended, the settlement contained one clause with massive strategic implications. Boeing's next aircraft must be built in the Puget Sound region of Washington state. That single provision locks the most consequential aircraft decision in modern aviation history to a specific location, a specific workforce, and a specific cost structure. Boeing can't simply build its next jet wherever labour is cheapest, or where production is most efficient. The workers who'll build it, and the contracts governing how they'll be paid, are already decided before a single design has even been confirmed. By the end of 2024, Boeing had burned through $14.3 billion in cash for the year. The 777X, Boeing's next wide-body aircraft, has slipped to a first delivery target of 2027, with pre-tax charges exceeding $15 billion. The 737 MAX 7 and MAX 10 variants still awaited FAA certification, now expected in 2026. Boeing was simultaneously drowning in demand and starving for capacity. It had over $521 billion in total backlog, and it couldn't build planes fast enough to touch it. Here's where this story takes the turn that nobody expected. Boeing doesn't face one decision. It faces a fork between two fundamentally different futures, and it can only walk down one of them. Path number one is the 797, the NMA, the twin-aisle mid-market aircraft that fills that gap the 757 left behind and goes beyond what the A321XLR can offer. It targets routes currently being underserved and gives airlines the tool they've been begging for since 2004. The case for it is strong. Airlines need it. The market is clear. The passenger and crew experience advantage over the XLR is real. The risks, however, are equally clear. No ideal engine currently exists for this aircraft. Development costs could exceed $20 billion. It requires a new production system, and Boeing would essentially be building an entirely new airplane from scratch, while simultaneously managing $53 billion in debt and recovering from 6 consecutive years of operational crisis. Path number 2 is the FSA, the future single aisle, a clean sheet replacement for the 737 MAX itself. The narrow-body market represents roughly 70% of all commercial aircraft sales globally. The A320neo family has already surpassed the 737 in total deliveries. If Boeing doesn't eventually replace the 737 with something genuinely next generation, it risks losing the single most important revenue stream in commercial aviation for a generation. But timing this wrongly could be catastrophic. Build it too early, and you lock in whatever engine technology exists right now, and you lose the efficiency advantage of waiting for genuinely next-generation propulsion. But build it too late, and Airbus accumulates so many orders and so much production experience the catching up becomes practically structurally impossible rather than just hard. Boeing can't afford to do both simultaneously. The maths is simply not there. There is a constraint sitting underneath both options that the industry tends to underplay, and it makes every calculation more complicated. Neither aircraft currently has an engine. Boeing's leadership has been consistent on this point. They will not launch a new aircraft without propulsion technology that delivers at least 20 to 30% better fuel efficiency over current engines. That is not a preference. It is a survival requirement in an era where fuel economics determine airline profitability and environmental regulations are tightening across Europe and beyond. CFM International, the joint venture between GE Aerospace and Safran, is developing the RISE program. It's an open fan architecture, essentially a visible, unducted fan design that promises roughly 20% better fuel efficiency than the LEAP engines powering today's 737 MAX, A320neo, and the Comac C919. The design is striking, almost radical, looking more like a propeller assembly than a traditional jet engine. But RISE is not expected to be service ready until the mid-2030s. Rolls-Royce meanwhile has demonstrated impressive efficiency gains with its UltraFan demonstrator, showing 25% improvement figures and making no secret of its ambition to re-enter the narrowbody market it last participated in decades ago. The problem is that no manufacturer currently offers a production-ready next-generation engine. The technology is coming, but it's not here yet. This creates an agonizing trade-off. Wait for the better engines, and you risk losing more mid-market orders to the A321XLR, while Airbus builds an even larger operational head start. And that's without talking about China. Move now with existing engines, and you lock your new aircraft into fuel economics that will look dated by the time the next generation of propulsion actually arrives. Ortberg himself captured the dilemma with unusual honesty. When is the market ready? When is the technology ready? When are we ready? He said all three currently point downward. 3 separate gates, all closed at the same time. Here's one part of the story that doesn't get enough attention. Because if and when Boeing does eventually commit to a new aircraft, it will not just be designing a new airplane, it will be rethinking how airplanes are built. The 787 introduced composite materials at scale to commercial aviation. The 797 or FSA would go further. Advanced composite structures throughout the airframe. More automated assembly lines that reduce the human error points that caused the quality problems of the past several years. Digital twin design systems that let engineers simulate and stress test every component before a single physical piece is manufactured. Some concepts even include structural health monitoring, sensors embedded directly into the airframe that track real-time fatigue data and flag maintenance needs before they become failures. The next Boeing aircraft will not just be built differently, it will, in a very real sense, know things about itself that no previous aircraft could communicate. That is the version of Boeing that airlines and passengers and investors want to believe in. The company that doesn't just recover from crises, but uses them as a forcing function to rebuild smarter. Whether Boeing can actually execute that vision is a different question entirely. Here's the cold truth that sits underneath every version of this conversation. Boeing's challenge is not just financial, it's not just technical, it is credibility. The company that once set the global standard for aerospace engineering now has to prove, before anyone will truly commit, that it can design, certify, and deliver a new aircraft program on time, on budget, and without the quality failures that have defined the past 6 years. The Spirit Aerosystems reacquisition for $8.3 billion, including debt, was an attempt to rebuild direct manufacturing control over fuselage production that Boeing had previously outsourced. The FAA's gradual restoration of Boeing's inspection authority signals regulatory trust slowly returning. Production rate increases on the 737 and 787 are real progress. But progress on existing programs is not the same as a new airplane. Airlines placing orders for the A321XLR today are not waiting around to see what Boeing announces. Every single one of those orders is a route, a fleet slot, and a decade-long relationship that the 797 was supposed to capture. Every year Boeing delays, Airbus builds more operational experience, more customer loyalty, and a production learning curve that becomes increasingly difficult to close. And as we've mentioned in other videos, China isn't holding back either, and even Russia is pushing forwards in the same segment. The A321XLR doesn't need to be the perfect aircraft, it just needs to be available, and it is. For decades, Boeing defined what commercial aviation looked like. The 707 made jet travel accessible. The 747 made mass long-haul travel possible. The 777 set efficiency and range records that still stand. The 787 brought composite construction into the mainstream. Each of those programs required enormous capital, enormous risk, and the kind of institutional confidence that comes from a company certain of its own identity. Boeing is simply not that company right now. It is a company in recovery, watching its competitor operate an aircraft in a market it gave away while carrying $53 billion in debt and managing a workforce whose trust it is still rebuilding. And yet the decision is coming. Whether Boeing announces something in 2026, or pushes it to 2027 or later, the announcement, when it comes, will mean something far beyond just a product launch. It will be proof of concept. Proof that a company can survive catastrophe, absorb the lessons, rebuild its culture, and still do the one thing that justified its existence for over a century: build something genuinely new. The engines are not ready. The aircraft does not exist. The debt is real. And the competition is flying. Boeing's board knows what the right aircraft could do for this company. The question is not whether the 797 can redefine mid-market aviation. The question is whether Boeing is genuinely ready to find out. And somewhere in that factory in Everett, where the ceiling is high enough to make clouds, the engineers already know which way they want to vote.